Welcome back, everyone, to Beyond the Riverwalk. This is Kevin Barron. I'm your host, and today we have got a great show for you. Our special guest is joining us is going to be Sergio Barrera. I have a great deal of admiration for his social media work and the things that he does around town. But before we get to talking to Sergio, let me remind you to go back and listen to our previous episodes. You can find them on iTunes, you can find them on Stitcher, you can find them on Google Play Music, and you can find them on the Satchel Podcast Player, which helps you find other local podcasts by simply hitting the local button. It'll use your geo information to find your local podcast, just like this one. So I'd encourage you to do that and support other podcasters here in San Antonio. Apart from that, you can also find us on social media. So find us in Facebook, find us in Twitter, and find us on Instagram. So I guess without further ado, let's move on to Sergio. Hey, Sergio, it's Kevin. How are you?
Hey, how's it going, Kevin?
Doing well. Thanks for doing this tonight.
Oh, well, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Well, I don't know a whole lot about you except what I found out, through looking on social media. So the whole idea behind our show is to, and it's relatively new, is just to kind of help us get out and meet some folks and do some new things and hopefully introduce other people who are relatively new to the area, everything that the city has and at least some things that we hadn't maybe run across before. So the thought, I guess, is just to talk to you about a little bit about what you do. And from what I've seen, and I probably don't know the half of it, but from what I've seen, you do the announcing work, and you've also got a radio show?
Yeah. I started originally just sort of, I was hosting it on Buzzsprout, and then I found the BlogTalkRadio option, and I love the notion of doing it live.
Yeah.
It's kind of a challenge for me, and so transported all, sort of moved everything into that format, and now I do a Wednesday night show from 7 to 9. And I try to do it every week, but with these big trips I have coming up, it's kind of been hard. So I'll be doing one tomorrow. And then, so it's kind of my work life is I'm a corporate trainer by trade.
Okay.
And so, I do a lot of public speaking in my daily work.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
So, that is kind of where the skills for speaking publicly were honed. And then, my background in roller derby started back in 2012 when my wife took up the sport. So
okay.
That has gone on for several years. And once I got wind of this whole podcasting thing, I knew it was out there, but I never really thought about doing it until about a year and a half ago when I was like, I really think that this is something I could have fun with.
Yeah.
And so that's where the podcast came in. So.
Oh, that's cool. So what's the topic that you're doing? I was thinking it had something to do with current events, politics kind of thing, but I may be wrong there.
Yeah, it's a bit. I'm sort of still finding my way in the live format, but the crux of the show, the goal of what I want to do with the show is to feature people who are passionate, featuring people that are passionate about things. Like, for instance, I feel very passionately about, roller derby and about announcing.
Yeah.
And as I was in that community, I came across people who had different, obviously a passion for the sport, but also other things that were important to them. So like a couple of weeks ago, I had a guest on who, again, roller derby player, but also a school teacher. I had a friend of mine who I met through the roller derby world who's a barbecue competitor,
Yeah.
So things like that. And so I love talking to people about what are the things that you're passionate about and why is it important to you? And I try to feature people, especially since right now most of my guests are coming from the world of roller derby. I try to feature people who would normally not consider themselves as famous enough, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
I love inviting people who are like, really, you want to talk to me? And I'm like, absolutely, because you have a story.
Yeah.
And so that's really where I think the uniqueness of my show is that as much as I recently had a guy by the name of Jerry Seltzer on, and he is the son of the man who invented the sport.
Really?
Yeah, he's in his mid 80s. He became, after his father, he became sort of the face and voice of our sport over the years. And we fondly call him the commissioner. Well, he's probably the most famous guest I've had if you consider my audience is typically roller derby folks. And but at the same time, as much as I love having someone like Jerry on, I also like having that skater who just finished her first year of playing and hasn't even, competed a full season, but she made it, and so it's about talking to people about the things that they themselves throw their lives into and say, this is what I'm about. And that's been the crux of the show. When I went live, it's an issue of trying to fill 2 hours, right?
Yeah.
And so what I do is I start the first 30 minutes or so. My co-host and I, we sort of talk current events, kind of get our voices out there about things that we see happening, and then I go into the first interview, and then from there we'll segue back. We'll talk about movies, or I think the last time we had a show, it was right after Bill Paxton died, so we did a tribute to Bill Paxton because we were both big fans.
Yeah.
And then second interview, and then from there, we just do some closing remarks and stuff. So we're still finding our way in the live format, but the biggest goal I have is to try to feature people who otherwise might not, they may not get invited to appear on a show, so to speak, because they're not in the elite level. I love featuring the sort of the man on the street, the woman on the street who's just gonna, they're working hard at something they love, and they have a story to tell as much as anybody else.
No, that's awesome. Where do people find the show? And you said it's on Wednesday nights.
Yeah, Wednesday nights. It's on BlogTalkRadio. It's BlogTalkRadio / a few minutes with. And I tend to post my show links on my Instagram and my Facebook. I'm needing to transfer my iTunes account. When I was hosting it previously with Buzzsprout, it was connected to iTunes, and I just need to get that process done for Blog Talk. So.
Yeah, that can kind of be a little bit of a pain.
Yeah. So eventually it'll be back on iTunes and on Google Play as well.
That's awesome. So how long have you been doing that show?
I started in, let me see, it was October timeframe of 2015 is when I first started, and then I took about a 6-month break at the top of 2016 because of the Derby travels, because I go all over the place for this roller derby thing. So then when I started back up, it was about mid-year last year, and I've been doing it consistently ever since. So total of about a year complete, but started about a year and a half ago. I'm up to 32 episodes that I've produced. So
that's really cool. And 2 hours is, like you said, is a lot of time to fill. We've done podcasts over the years. It's probably been a couple of years since we've done one, but we've done probably around 100 episodes of various different things over the years. We did a craft beer thing for a little while. We did one that was a food-based podcast, restaurants and other types of interviews. And then we did one that was basically just small business, trying to promote small business and helping people understand what not-for-profits are in the area and what they're working on. And that was a lot of fun because it was similar to, it sounds like, to what you're talking about in terms of getting their stories out there, because a small business owner does it for a reason. They usually don't go into business, for the money. They do it because they love what they work on or what their project is. Yeah. So I definitely got kind of a kindred spirit there. Well, you mentioned the roller derby thing. I know absolutely nothing about roller derby. I was telling a friend of mine today, apart from what I've seen of what you post and what I remember from years ago in Laverne and Shirley episode, I know nothing about it. So he was schooling me a little bit at work today because he, surprisingly to me, I didn't know he knew this. He knew a bunch, but I don't know if he's the expert that you are. Can you tell us a little bit about it and how big is the sport these days?
Well, so a little bit of history. So the sport started in 1935. It was invented by Leo Seltzer. Over the course of the next, I'd say, 20, 30 years, it evolved from basically races into the sport that we know it is today. The traditional world of roller derby began with a banked track format, where it's typically what you see when you hear roller derby. Right. And it's a sport in which basically two teams are racing around this track, and the objective is to get the player is called a jammer. Her role is to get through the pack to try to score points. The way you score points as simply as possible is your scoring player, the jammer, has to break through the pack once, and then at that point her scoring ability begins. So every time she laps the pack, she's passing opposing players. And so as she passes opposing players, she's scoring a point for each player that she's passing. And so you have basically a 2-minute window in flat track roller derby or a 1-minute window in banked track roller derby, where you're trying to lap the pack as often as possible because you're picking up points every skater you pass from the opposing team. So the blockers, that's really where they come in, because they're preventing you from trying to make that pass. And the opposing blockers are basically, you're battling it out for position to try to clear space for your jammer. And so that's where the big hits come in, because you've got a lot of contact in the middle of the pack where blockers are trying to gain advantage. And so you've got a lot of big hits. There's legal hitting zones and things of that nature. And so the blockers are busy trying to clear lanes or make contact with the scoring jammer. And so that's where you get a lot of the big hits and a lot of the the strategic play, building walls and things of that nature to prevent people from passing, because the points are scored when you pass your opponents.
So it's got to be pretty high speed, right? And how many people are actually on the track at once?
So there's 5 players to a side. There's 4 blockers and a jammer on each team. And so it's pretty high speed in terms of the typical play. But because of the strategic nature of the flat track game, in particular because of its rule set, you will get some situations in the flat track version where the play will be a little slower, because it's more about building a strong wall, holding position, the jammer's pushing against that wall, trying to break it, trying to get through. Where in the bank track game, it's constant motion, race around the track. You're using the banked portions to gain speed. And so the contact there is more so about the blockers trying to jostle for position, hit each other off of the path that their jammer's trying to get through. And then, in that regard, speed, constant motion, and contact really becomes exciting, because you're just hitting at a higher rate of speed. And so there can be some pretty dramatic results, I guess is the best way to put it.
Well, what's the typical score like at the end of what do they call it? Is it a game, or is it a bout, or is it
traditionally it's been called a bout.
Okay,
that's people who are like myself. I love the notion of calling it a bout, because I think that's really what it is.
Yeah.
We do call it a game now. There's been some terminology changes over the last few years, but bout, game, doesn't matter. It's about the same. The scores in the flat track derby world can get into the hundreds, depending on the way in which the teams are matched up. I called a few games over the last few weeks that are averaging into the early 200s, maybe 300s, depending, because there's more rotations that are called jams. So you have 2 30-minute halves, and those halves are made up of what are called 2-minute jams. The 2-minute jams continue until the half is over. And so you can see where in that 2-minute span you can get quite a few points scored, depending on how many times a jammer laps. The maximum number of points you could get per pass is 5. And so, you're looking at scores in the 200 to 300s, depending on the flat track side. On the bank track game, it's been a while since I've been to a bank track game, but they tend to have lower scores because they have shorter jams. So they'll jam for 1 minute, and that minute goes pretty quickly. But I would say that low hundreds would be average, I think, in the bank track game. So you do score a lot. But it's also a situation where your points they come at a price, I guess is the best way to describe it. So,
well, from your perspective as an announcer, are you keeping track of the score yourself, or how do you keep track of something moving that quickly?
Well, for us as announcers, the thing that we focus on is basically describing the action as it appears on the track.
Okay, like a color guy. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. You have your typical, if we break it down into its basic parts, then you have a situation where you have yourself and a co-announcer, ideally a third, because the third would be calling out sponsorships and so forth. And then the other two would be, play-by-play and color commentating. And, I'm one, like many, that we sort of develop a trend towards wanting to do both in terms of our approach to the game. You don't necessarily have to have one who's just a play-by-play and one who's a color commentator. And what we get to do, thankfully, is benefit from scoreboards that are set up at the games There are those who are tracking scores and point scoring and so forth. So we get to see that come up on a scoreboard.
Okay.
Depending where you are, the venue will have or the league will have put up some form of scoreboard that is usually an LCD projector connected to a laptop where the scoring is being done. It's actually very, very meticulous in terms of there are scoring programs for roller derby that are used that will show you, how much time is left, what jam number it is, how many points are being scored as the jam is going. So we really, have a great advantage in that regard. So we can then focus on the action on the track and describing what's going on. A rule of thumb I like to teach new announcers is talk about what has happened, not necessarily what's happening, because where we have to be careful as announcers is we have to make sure we don't give away any sort of position or advantage to any of the teams by what we say. And so
that's a good. I didn't think of that. Yeah.
It's not like the announcing portion of roller derby is cool because in a venue format for any other sport, you know how it is. You have the announcers are basically there to highlight. In basketball, so and so checking in, for so and so, and the scores at the end of maybe at the end of a time frame, or even in football, they're letting you know what happened, but only in small snippets. We get to call the sport and describe what we're seeing as it's going on, and so there's more of a conversational approach, so that your audience will be able to understand what just happened because everything is moving so fast. One of the things I love to do, and I know a lot of my fellow announcers love, is we have a conversational flow about what we're seeing happen, and in doing so, we're weaving in the rules that are part of the game, so that the person who's there watching roller derby for the first time gets a chance to say, "Oh, okay, that's what's happening." And so, it's a sport full of rules, and there's a penalty box, so there's penalty calls going on, and so our job as announcers is to describe the action so that the person who is there for the first time will enjoy it and have the desire to want to come back, and the person who's there as your diehard fan is also enjoying it because they're getting a chance to sort of assimilate not just what they're seeing, but how we're describing it. And so it's a lot of fun because it's a lot more that we get to say and talk about there in the venue in front of all these people. And so we get to we get to sort of rah the crowds and get them going. We'll invite them to cheer for their home teams or cheer for their respective teams. Even though, the rule for announcers is, you want to remain neutral. But if you're doing a house call, we also are trying to get the crowd amped up and cheering for the skaters and, for the action that's going on. So it's a lot of fun. It's a good mix of announcing and also sort of crowd wrangling at the same time. That's
pretty neat. You talked about the league and the teams. What's the scope of it? That's one thing I was curious about. I mean, how many teams are in is it a geographic area? Is it just basically a group that wants to form one? How is it structured?
So the typical structure, and I have spent most of my derby career in the flat track version of the sport. And so from the point of about the late 80s, there was a little bit of a drop-off in the sport. And in roughly the 2001 timeframe, the sport was rejuvenated and sort of reintroduced in its flat track version, which we sort of consider the modern version of the sport. It actually started up in Austin, Texas, and it was just basically people who discovered the sport and wanted to revive it. And so typically what you see in a town like Austin or Dallas, even Houston, you'll have several teams that can form because, they're geographically it's easier to say, okay, well, if I'm in Dallas, that's a big area. So, given where I'm at, I'll give you an example using Dallas. Dallas has a team called the Dallas Derby Devils, and they are sort of central to the city, and they have several home teams, several skaters that form that team. North of Dallas, you have Denton, Texas, where you can find North Texas Roller Derby. And they formed so that, I'm in North Texas, but I'd like something closer to home, right? And so not little leagues, but leagues will form in communities like that because, someone says, you know what, I have to drive all the way to Dallas to do this, or I have to drive all the way to Plano to do this. I mean, how can we form a league and let's see what we can get going? So what's happened is over the course of the last several years, there's sort of been this grassroots movement of communities saying, let's build a team here and let's see what we can do to recruit skaters and so forth. And so you'll have leagues start to pop up in various areas. So what that means is for the sport itself, over the last several years, we have seen quite an explosion of teams in areas all over the country and all over the world. It has become a global sport. When I started 5 years ago in 2012, the organization that is the governing body for flat track roller derby, which is called the Women's Flat Track Derby Association, was hosting regional playoffs and then what was called at the time a national championship. Today we have playoffs, but also it is now the international championships because the sport has grown to a global scale, and so you're having teams that are competing. And at the higher levels, you're seeing teams from, England, from Australia, from Canada, and other places that are qualifying for these tournaments and are, playing their way into what is the final championship tournament of the year. And so now it's international because the sport has grown so exponentially in the last few years. And so it's a wonderful thing because in an area like San Antonio, you have three teams. There's the Alamo City Rollergirls, which is the league I'm part of. They have been in existence now since 2003, if my math is right. Long history, sanctioned by the WFTDA. And then you also have the Heart of Texas all skaters, which is part of the San Antonio community. They have their own organization and they have their own schedule as well. And then you also have a team called River City Riot. River City Riot is a juniors team of kids that play the sport. I believe the ages are 5 to 17. At the age of 18, you age out of juniors and you can now play the adult game. And so in a community like ours, there are leagues that sprout up because of size of the city, because of, a differing view, say, on rule sets or, approach to the game. And so it happens that in cities across the country, a league will spring up and then somewhere nearby, another group will start because, hey, that's pretty neat. We'd like to have that for our community. And so that's sort of the genesis of how these teams have become so available for communities across the country and around the world.
That is really amazing. I mean, I didn't realize it was that big. I know you mentioned in a conversation or emails or something we had before we got together that you were going to be traveling to California and then over to Japan, I believe.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, one of the things that happens throughout the course of a derby year or derby season is there are several tournaments that occur around the world and around the country here in the U.S. And so what happens is teams will either apply to be part of or be selected to participate in tournaments that are hosted by leagues across, the globe. Myself, I am headed to Bakersfield, California this coming weekend because the Dust Bowl Invitational, which has been in existence for quite a long time. I believe this is the 8th annual. Teams in that area of California are coming together for a tournament that has traditionally occurred year after year. And so as an announcer, you network and you get connected with folks and you can apply to be an announcer at these various tournaments. And so the Dust Bowl Invitational is where I'll be headed this weekend in Bakersfield. Now from there, I'll be flying out Monday morning to Okinawa, Japan for an event called the Tomodachi Roller Derby Tournament. It's going to be held there in Okinawa, and it's going to feature teams from Tokyo, the Tokyo Rollergirls, a team there from Okinawa called the Devil Dog Derby Dames, a few other teams that are participating, even one coming in from Canada, a men's team. And then also they are going to be featuring the teams that represent Japan in the various World Cups that exist in the sport. We have a Women's World Cup that happens every 3 years, and we have a Men's World Cup that has been on a 2-year rotation. And so we get to see next week the Ninjapan Rollers, as they're called, which is the men's team. And then Team Japan for the women will be playing at this tournament. And so it's really kind of cool because in an international tournament like that, you're getting to see not just local teams, but also a lot of pride in the country's teams themselves that also get to play. So it's a lot of fun.
So when they cross, I guess when the teams cross continents, essentially, and I guess cross leagues, is there a general commitment, I guess, that everybody uses the same league rules, or is there a set of rules set out for that tournament, or how's it go?
Yeah, the World Cup tournaments they use the rules of the Women's Flat Track Derby Association. There are several organizations that exist. There's the Women's Flat Track Derby Association, which is known to be sort of the governing body of the largest portion of our sport. There's also USA Roller Sports, USARS as we call it. They have a rule set as well. And then there's Modern Athletic Derby Endeavor, which is another. They play under, they're the MAID organization. The WFTDA, because of its scope, is the go-to rule set for the World Cup tournaments that exist in both the women's and the men's tournaments. And so that way, because so many of the athletes that play on their national teams are playing on teams that are WFTDA, so it's just easier for that rule set to be the one that's adopted for those types of tournaments.
Yeah, that makes sense. That definitely makes sense. Well, in bringing it back, I guess, here to San Antonio, what does the season look like, or what does the year look like? Where are we now? I guess we're recording this in March 2017. So what's it look like now?
We're actually at the beginning of what will be the 2017 season for the Alamo City Rollergirls. That's the league I can speak of with 100% accuracy because that's my league. Yeah. So we are beginning our season here in March. We will be having a bout on the 25th here in town. Alamo City Rollergirls plays at Mission Concepcion Sports Park. That's where we have our venue for our events. And the first bout is actually really cool because we have within our organization, we have home teams that the skaters are assigned to, and they play competitively throughout the season. And so we have several matchups that feature our home teams. And then based on record, they advance into an interleague playoff. And then there's a championship bout at the end of the season. So it's several months of action that we have within our league. And then also on that first weekend of our year, we're going to have what we call our all-star team is the Las Tejanas team. They represent us at tournaments and in rankings for the WFTDA organization. They will be featured that evening as they take on a team from Texas Rollergirls. Texas Rollergirls are fondly known as the godmothers of roller derby, as they were part of the rebirth of the sport out of Austin, Texas. They'll be sending a team called the Hail Marys, which is, I don't mind saying, one of my favorite teams. They'll be coming down to play Las Tejanas. Actually, correction, it is March 18th. So March 18th is our season opener for Alamo City Rollergirls. There will be a bout featuring the Tejanas of ACRG taking on the Hail Marys of Texas Rollergirls. And then the second bout of the evening will feature Las Luchadoras taking on the Bradley Bombshells, who were last year's Alamo City Rollergirls home team's champions. And so it's going to be a fun night. And that begins several months of bouts that will be occurring here in San Antonio once a month. And the schedules can be found at our Facebook page, Alamo City Rollergirls. And there's also a website, alamocityrollergirls.com.
I will make sure that I go out there, find them, and link them all to the show notes here and share them. Yeah, that sounds like a lot of fun. What's the crowds like? I mean, I haven't been to the venue before, so what's the typical crowd like? And if someone wanted to attend, what would they typically spend to bring the family out, for example?
Well, we have pretty good turnout. We have those diehard fans that have been with us for a very long time, and so they return. And what we tend to see is we see a really much of a larger crowd on the first bout of every season. I like to say sometimes that the sport of roller derby in many ways is sort of a bucket list item. It's that thing you say, you know what, I'm going to go skydive. Check, I did that. Sometimes it's, I want to go see roller derby. Check, I did that. And so we get great crowds on the first bouts of every year. And then throughout the year, it sort of settles into, a couple of hundred per bout. And so it's that nice sort of home feel of the fans that are family, they come.
Yeah,
they
that's
come
a pretty
and
good crowd.
Yeah, and we do pretty well. And so it really depends on sort of the time of year when we're having the bouts and so forth. And, it's one of those things that every league, it's a challenge for us to figure out, okay, how is it that we're going to maintain our crowds, and how do we get them, how do we draw them in? And so we try to do different things to make it a compelling thing for customers to come, or for fans, I should say, to come back to. So that's why we reinstituted the home teams this past season, and it was a lot of fun to see our fans, buy the T-shirts for the teams that they were supporting. And so you'd see a lot of fans in orange that were supporting the Mustang Sallies, which was a team we had last year, and you'd have the blue shirts of Las Luchadoras fans, and they would really get into supporting their home team within a team, right? And so we get good crowds. We have a lot of fun. And from a price standpoint, we try to keep it so that it's affordable for as many folks as possible. So what we do is for every bout that we have month to month, there's a pre-sale time frame in which tickets will cost $10. For at the door, it's $13. And then let's see, $5. Anybody under $5, there's no charge, but $5 to, I'm trying to get the range here. I'm trying to figure out what the $5 ticket is. We have a $13 ticket and a $5 ticket as
maybe,
well.
Students or something like that, maybe.
Well, yeah, I'm trying to get information off of the page here.
Oh,
so, yeah.
Well, that's one I can link to.
Kids 5 and over, $5. Adults $13. Pre-sale tickets are $10, and kids under 5 are free. So, it's a good night of derby action, and we, like I said, we have a lot of fun month to month as we have these games. And so on some months we'll have our home teams playing each other. Other months we'll have our travel team playing Las Tejanas, because what these teams are doing, the Las Tejanas team, for example, they have to play a certain number of sanctioned games per year in order to gain ranking points to work their way up the rankings. The hope always being that you can crack into the top 40 or so, and you start to be invited to the playoff tournaments toward the end of the year. And so, that's always the goal of any team that's part of the WFTDA organization. And the Alamo City Rollergirls have been the sanctioned representative of the WFTDA here in our town.
Yeah, so that's the quote unquote official league that would run up through that.
Yes.
Through that structure. Yeah, that's pretty cool. Well, we're going to have to check that out. We moved here, I guess, probably, I mentioned this on some other episodes, probably at the end of 2015. And there's so much in this city that we just didn't have elsewhere where we've lived. Yeah. And we've liked where we've lived. That we've definitely loved it in a lot of cases, but this is such a great place. And there's so much diversity of ideas, and there's so much diversity of things to do. And when I saw that what you were doing out there, I was like, if opportunity presents itself, I really need to talk to you, because it seems like it'd be a lot of fun. And I guess on that note, one of the questions I had is, where does this nickname come from? And is that part of the roller derby thing, or is that something else?
Yes. It is absolutely part of the roller derby thing. One of the biggest traditions in roller derby is we adopt names that represent who we are, and it comes from different aspects of ourselves. My wife started playing the sport in 2011, and she immediately took on the name Ginger. Ginger, she's a redhead.
Yeah.
So her derby name is Ginger Snapped. And the unique aspect of her name is she spells it Ginger. It's J and the word injure. And so it's little unique qualities like that names are made up of. For me, I had long wanted to utilize the name because it was sort of one of those crazy moments that you just. It was a one-off moment that probably was never going to get any more attention. I was watching a television show, and it was a cooking show, and the person who was narrating, it was one of those travelogue shows where a person, a chef was at a restaurant. He was talking about this dish he had that was so delicious, and he described the dish as being like clouds of piggy fatness. It was a pork dish, of course, and so. I watched it, and as soon as he said that, I turned to my wife and I said, "That's got to be a name. That's going to be." And what I said at the time was, "That's going to be my rap name. I'm going to be MC Piggy Phatness."
There you go.
And so a couple of years later, she picked up the sport, and in 2012, I had the opportunity to start announcing, and we are able to adopt a name, for our Derby persona. And so Piggy Phatness is what stuck with me. I changed the fatness to Phatness. And yeah, so that's where that came from. And so it's definitely part of that persona that I bring to the microphone. And it's a lot of fun. If you'd have told me years ago that people would now call me Piggy, I probably might have been offended. But now it's a very, very nice, endearing term.
It's a badge of honor, given where it comes from and what it's for. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Oh, oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. Yeah, no, I was going to say that's one of the more unique aspects of our sport. And so one of the funniest things that we find when we've been in the sport for any length of time is that we don't really know people in the sport in terms of their real names. We know each other by our Derby names. And so there was a time where across Facebook you would know, that's so-and-so's page and so forth. And so with some recent changes that Facebook had where you had to have your actual, listed name, it's kind of funny sometimes trying to find people because we don't know each other by our government names, we like to say.
Yeah, the government names. I like that.
We know each other by our Derby names, and so I'll talk to someone and I'll say, hey, so, have you had a chance to talk to Hat-Trick Harry? Hat-Trick Harry is a buddy of mine who is an announcer in the Dallas area, and of course, you say Hat-Trick Harry, and more than half the room, if you're in a Derby crowd, knows who you're talking about. But if you say Cody Gill, it's like it doesn't resonate necessarily as much as as his Derby name does. Nowadays, if I'm in a Derby group and someone says, hey, do you know where Sergio is? They're like, who's Sergio? And so that's kind of a cool aspect of our sport.
Well, you talked about, the podcast, the show that you do, and talking to interesting people. And I personally would definitely count you as one of those people. So this has been a lot of fun. But at the same time, I think what you're describing with roller derby is that, and the names and everything else, just the culture, is that it kind of creates a community, right? I mean,
it does.
So it's a tight knit, I would assume, kind of thing, and the fans become part of that.
Yes.
So for people, I guess, that are new to the area like us, that want to kind of build a set of contacts, get to have some fun at the same time, learn something maybe new that they haven't seen before, this sounds like a great way to do it.
It really is, and the beauty of our sport, the thing that we love so much, is that it is as inclusive as you can possibly get. You have a community of people who come from so many different walks of life, all walks of life, be it nationality, gender, sexual orientation. Nothing is going to be any reason to exclude you from the sport. The other thing I love about our sport is that it is, I don't know how else to describe it other than to say that it's no respecter of body type. You would look at athletes that play our sport and you would say, this person is either too small, they're too heavy, they're too this, they're too that, and yet they will skate you into the ground because what they are is conditioned, what they are is well trained. And not only that, beyond all of that physical development that they achieve as they improve and as they continue to skate, it's the confidence that it brings out in people. It's that community sense of, if I think about the women I know in this sport who play, and the reason I say women first is because this began as a sport that was, and it totally is right now. percentage-wise, this is a female sport. The sisterhood that develops within our sport is such a vital part of its growth and its success, in that these women come together, whether they're lawyers outside of Derby or they're teachers, any sort of background that they come from. When they put those skates on, when they put their equipment on and that helmet, they are who their name is. So if you're talking to a skater who I'm trying to think of an example. If you talk to a skater who's a teacher and she skates under the name, I'm going to just use a friend of mine from Dallas, Triceratops. She is the teacher during the day, but when she puts those skates on and she gets on that track, she becomes Triceratops, and Triceratops is going to get out there and she's going to play her best because she has a community of sisters around her that's going to support her, that's going to help her move forward, and they're going to have fun. And so that's the community aspect that is so important in our sport, that really has created some of the most confident people I've ever met in my life. And then as guys, we get to participate as well. We have men's teams, we have men's leagues, co-ed leagues are starting to become a little bit more part of the norm. And then of course kids, and the sport allows children to enter into this community that is so positive and is so supportive, and they see their parents do it, they see their friends do it, and now all of a sudden they get to put those skates on and get out there, and so it's a community that sort of that grows, that starts early, and that really sets a tone for people to gain confidence and perseverance, all those great qualities that you want to see. And it's just something that once you're in it, you're hooked. And even fans, I'll be the first to say, you don't necessarily have to put skates on and go out there and hit and play. You could come to a bout and you could decide to, I'm going to learn how to help officiate. I'm going to maybe put my skates on and learn how to referee, or maybe I'm going to sit down and learn how to help scorekeep or penalty time. Even if you're the person who comes out and just fixes the track throughout the game and puts tape down, that's a vital role. And you become part of this community by simply saying this, I dig what's happening here and I dig what it's doing for people. And so I could go on and on at how much Derby changes lives. And there's a phrase in roller derby we use, and we say Derby saved our souls. And it really is true, because there are people who come to our sport and they're in a place in their life where they're broken, or they just need something different or something to change. And I have yet to see Derby fail that person. It always comes through for us, and we get a chance to see people really become the best version of themselves.
Well, it sounds like, this is one place, it's like a lot of places, I guess, in your life that you can find whatever your mission or your ministry is. And it sounds like this is one that you found. So,
absolutely.
Yeah, that is awesome. Well, thank you very, very much for being part of this. And I would love to, hopefully we can plan to get out there one day, because I'm really looking forward to this. I think we have a daughter, she's 19. I think she'd get a kick out of it. I think my wife would as well. So we're going to look. So it's the 18th, right? It's March 18th. I'm going to make sure this is going to get posted soon. So we'll make sure that that's out there. And then we'll also put the links out there to Alamo City Rollergirls, right? And also to I'm going to go on Blog Talk Radio and find, it's called A Few Minutes With, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Gotcha. I'm making my notes here while we're talking. So I will make sure I put all those links out there. If there's ever anything I can do for you, or you just want to chat again, I'll do the same thing. I'll give you a holler. But I hope you have safe travels. And let us know before we go, where can we find you out there? Are you kind of building, some support for the podcast? Where else can people find you on social media, for example?
Yeah, on social media, right now I've got a page for my announcing work, which is Piggy Phatness. You'll find that on Facebook. On Instagram, I'm also on there as Piggy Phatness, PIGGY and those are sort of my the places where I share where I'm at, where I'm going. And Instagram, it's a mix of things. Derby, of course, a big part of it, and so that's where you can find me. As far as the show itself, like you said, it's on Blog Talk Radio, A Few Minutes With, And I'll hopefully have it on other portals soon once I can sit down and make the time to do that.
Well, yeah, you stop traveling a little bit and settle in. But you're having fun, so yeah, do it and just be safe with it. But
Indeed.
Yeah, that is awesome. Well, thank you again very much for being part of this. I've really learned a lot. I've definitely got enthusiastic about this. I'm going to have to do some more looking online.
No, absolutely. Well, and like I said, anytime that you come out, let me know, and I'll let our league know that you're going to come and visit. And I'd love to meet you guys in person. So.
That sounds like a plan. We'll do that. I'm going to put it on the calendar, and
right,
I'll be in touch.
Okay, great.
So thank you so much again, and thank you everybody else for listening to the show. If you've got ideas for show guests or ideas for different things that we can publish out there or share, just contact us at podcast@beyondriverwalk.com. And you can also find us, like you can find Sergio, over on Facebook, on Twitter, and on Instagram. You can simply do a search for Beyond Riverwalk, and you'll pull us up. So until next time, we'll see y'all soon. Beyond the Riverwalk.